G'day everyone, welcome to the podcast. I'm Mitch Docker, this is Life in the Peloton, and this podcast this year is being brought to you by our proud partner, Rapha. Now, ever since Rapha was founded, they were all about trying to make people fall in love with cycling. They do that through their RCC, the Rapha Cycling Club members, the events that they do, and the stories they create. That is the motto of Rapha, apart from making fantastic kit, which you hear me talk about all the time. This week on the podcast, we've got a different guest. We've got something a little bit different. Have you ever wondered how those staff, I'm talking about the World Tour staff, I'm talking about the Soigneurs, the mechanics, the osteopaths, the chiropractors, how do they actually get in the teams? What is the pathway of getting across there? If you're not a European across there living in Europe, you're an Australian, you're an American, a Kiwi, and you're thinking, how can I actually get across there and work on one of these teams? How does it all happen? Well, this is the podcast for you. I'm sitting back talking with Andy Gerrans. Now, you may have heard that name before. Gerrans, Simon Gerrans, of course. Well, this is Andrew Gerrans, his brother. Now, I had the pleasure of working with Andrew way back when I stagiaired with AG2R in 2005, and Andy was also stagiairing himself as an osteopath or as a soigneur on the team out here at the Herald Sun Tour in Melbourne. And ever since then, we've sort of followed each other's footsteps. Andy went away from the sport for a while, came back into the sport, and then has since been in the sport since 2013 when he rejoined with Green Edge back in those days. Anyway, I'm not going to get too much into the story because we talk about it there. Now, you're going to have to excuse the audio on this one because we were sitting outside at a park. I caught up with Andy when he was back here over the summer, and we had a little bit of wind catching in the microphone. So, as you know, I'm not always the best recorder out there. So you have to excuse the wind when it pops in and out. But I think it's doable. You got to listen to this story because this is a really good one. It's a different angle, but I think it's a really interesting angle hearing about the pathway to the World Tour as a staff member. We've also got some other exciting news for you too. You may have heard me talk about it last week on Talking Luft. I'm talking about the new cap, the new casquette. Talking Luft is all about style on the bike, cycling lifestyle, the rituals of riding that we love to share, and maybe some of those that we don't, and especially an ode to, in my opinion, the best era of cycling when style in the Peloton was just as important as performance. Now we've dedicated a cap especially to Luft and talking about it, and that's what we've created. I hope you like it as much as we did creating it. You may have seen it on our Instagram. It's going to be dropping tomorrow, Thursday. If you want to get in on that, subscribe to lifeinthepeloton.com and you are going to get the first heads up to when it's going to be released. There's only going to be a limited edition. Get across to lifeinthepeloton.com, check out our Etsy store, and you will see them there. Guys, that's happening tomorrow. Exciting news. I'm really excited always to put out a fresh cap. Now, guys, without further ado, I bring you Andy Gerrans. Sitting down here today with a good friend and an old, well, actually, we've been together pretty much from the beginning of my career as I started to, go up in cycling. I started with AG2R and I met Andrew Gerrans. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. Great to be here.
Good to have you on board. What I'm going to tackle today is Andrew's a qualified osteopath and he's made his way into the World Tour, and we worked together at Green Edge for 5 years, actually 6 years really. But we also worked together before that when I stagiaired with AG2R, then we did some stuff with Rapha, and then popped around to his house in Melbourne, and we just stayed in contact over those years. So what exactly is an osteopath? Because, physio, chiro, what is it? So everyone out there listening, I know some people know already what an osteopath is. Pretty common here in Australia, but it's not super common all around the world. Well, in my opinion, I could be completely wrong here. Tell us what it is.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and you'd think it's a really straightforward answer, but it really depends on where you're based in the world. In every country, there's different levels of training, different qualifications, and how they treat can be quite different as well. But from an Australian perspective, it's a hands-on musculoskeletal therapy. We're at university for 5 years. It's a double degree in Australia. and we're government registered practitioners here as primary care practitioners. So, somebody can come in off the street and say, in a private practice, I've got this injury, I've got this problem, what can I do about it? And we're qualified to be able to deal with that, to know if it's something that can be treated with hands-on therapy or if they need referral onto, a medical specialist or for further testing. But it's hands-on therapy where we're giving advice around exercises and a lot of lifestyle advice as well, ergonomics and nutrition and other factors. But it's we're doing soft tissue work, we're doing stretching, manipulation sometimes if it's needed, and a big part of that is educating the individual about their injury and or illness and what they can do to really help themselves to get better. So I'd like to think it's a holistic therapy and something where we encompass not just kind of where the problem is, but really trying to identify what's causing the problem and getting to the kind of root of that.
It's almost like the best of all realms, isn't it?
I might be a little bit biased.
What I'm really interested in is there a real stereotypical line to the World Tour? And so what I want to talk to Andy about today is that. But before we get there, Andy, I wanted you to just sort of explain where you came from, where you grew up, and what the start of your life was when you from school, pretty much.
Yeah. I grew up in Mansfield in northeast Victoria, and just a pretty typical country sort of upbringing, I'd say, and pretty active lifestyle and playing a lot of sports growing up, and just really interested in health and that sort of active lifestyle. And my mum was a nurse at the local hospital, so always following that sort of health and medical side of things. So that probably started my interest in hands-on therapy and osteopathy and how I ended up into studying osteo. So finished school and went to study in Melbourne, and sort of throughout the years at university, I would Simon would come back each year from racing in Europe, and he'd say, can you do anything useful yet? What can I get out of you? And
can I get a free treatment?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So he'd come back over the summer holidays or the sort of European off season, and the first year I said, well, probably not. I can assess you, but I probably can't treat you yet. And by the end of the second year, I was capable at doing some soft tissue work and a bit of basic sort of treatment. And my first experience working in racing, I guess, in the sport was 2005, and that's where you came into it, our first meeting, and that was the Sun Tour. He was putting together a team with AG2R as a bit of a composite team with a couple of European riders and Australian staff, and obviously yourself and a couple of other young Australian riders. And it was a volunteer role, and you learn you have to pitch in and help out in any way you can. It was primarily doing massage at the end of the stage, but before the stage you're making bottles and sandwiches and you're driving to feed zones and all that sort of stuff.
Where were you in your study then? Was that sort of at the end?
That was end of third year, so it's a 5-year course, and I was sort of basically halfway through. So
was that a pretty big opportunity as studying osteopath to go away and work with a pro team, whether that would be a football team, AFL, whatever it is? You were cycling at a pretty elite level.
Yeah.
Within your sort of classmates, were like, wow, that's a good opportunity, mate.
Yeah, that was the case at the time. I probably didn't appreciate it at the time, just because you're working with your brother and some of his teammates, and my classmates were all pretty envious that I got to travel a week on the road and travel around Victoria working with these elite athletes. But
was it a good experience that you can remember back to?
Yeah, it was, and it's the first time working in that environment, so you're kind of taking away all the high points from it, and it's a busy week, as you know, but really good experience and learnt a lot from it, and great way to make some connections with some other people involved in the sport as well. Yeah.
Cool. So, and then from there, as you were sort of moving through, was it then starting to set up, look, Simon Gerrans, your brother, everyone knows his name. Mm-hmm. He's in cycling, he's starting to really tap into his career. You just did a little stagiaire, actually, same as I did with AG2R. Were you like, oh, actually, if I graduate here a couple of years away, this could be a good job for me in the future? Yeah,
potentially, and I think it opened some doors already after doing that race. I was starting my master's degree the next year, and one of my supervisors suggested a study for me, which was quite unique at the time. particularly in osteopathy, it was doing some performance testing of a new design of bicycle hub. So really outside of the scope of normal osteo masters, but he could see that I'd worked in cycling and had an interest in that area. So already my research degree kind of was leaning down that pathway. So the following year in 2006, I got asked back with Drapac actually, and I did the Sun Tour. I'm not sure if you did it that year in 2006.
I think so, yeah. I remember, yeah.
Again, back to the Sun Tour. Simon wasn't involved obviously in that team at the time, and sort of opened some doors with other people and creating those networks, and I think that's a really important part of sort of getting into the industry. And the following year I did a tour of South Korea with Drapac again, with a different group of riders and staff, and so really trying to get my name out there a little bit in the sport.
Did you understand though at that point there, and obviously you couldn't foresee what was going to happen now, let's say that's actually almost like 15 years ago. This is the right step, I need to make network here, I need to, I guess it's probably just like that in any type of job scenario. You need a network, you need to get experience, you need to understand the lay of the land. But now when you're looking back on it, you think, like you just said then, it was actually probably a pretty good step up, that most sort of people in the industry would love to have that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. But I think at the same time you need to look for those opportunities and make the most of them when they come along. You need to sort of put yourself out there and take some risks and really try and use those networks to your advantage if you're going to try and get your foot in the door. It's a pretty hard industry to get into, and I think you really need to put yourself out there if you're going to sort of have a go at it.
The pro cycling industry, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so then at this point there, you've been working with Drapac and you're thinking, okay, well, I'm assuming you're thinking, yeah, right, let's go overseas, that's the next step, let's get into a team and let's go from there. I don't know, is that what you think as a staff member? Because as a rider, that's what you think.
I wasn't locked into where I was going with my career once I finished university. I actually had a job lined up in Hamilton Island in northern Queensland.
Did you?
And as it turned out, my master's project took a year longer, and
what was your master's? Oh, that's right.
Working on the new wheel. So it sort of got a little bit delayed and put my plans off by 12 months or so. So come to the start of 2009, Simon was actually starting with Cervelo test team, and they were kind of building the team and looking for staff. They were looking for support staff in Monaco, and he said, we've got a group of guys here, and a lot of those guys I'd worked with over the pre-seasons in Melbourne and doing some massage work, so I knew some of the riders there. And
was it like Jez Hunt?
Yeah, Jez Hunt and Cookie and Matt Wilson and guys like that, Mark Renshaw, those kind of guys that I'd worked with previously. And they were keen to have me on board over there and to look after them when they're training, and also potentially have a foot in the door with the team. So I sort of bit the bullet and packed up and moved to Monaco and rented not in Monaco, but basically across the road, and moved there and started working with the guys. And I had a job interview with one of the medical doctors on the team, and they gave me an opportunity to do a couple of races with them in early 2009. That was my first experience at a world tour level in Europe. And it was a great experience, but I kind of got to the point by around mid-year, they'd offered me a position full-time for the following year, based in Switzerland, living in Basel, 2-year contract, and it scared me a little bit because I didn't quite know what I was in for at the time, and I just had this vision of being stuck in a little apartment and doing airport runs and living out of a service course or something like that. So,
which is actually the reality of what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could already envision that 6 months in. You're like, I'm starting to get the lay of the land here.
Yeah.
I can quickly get pigeonholed into something. It looks glamorous. I'm working on this team, but actually, if you see the reality, I'm living in, like you said, in Basel, doing airport runs, you know.
Yeah, and it didn't sit right with me at the time, and I enjoyed the experience and the races I had, but I was in my graduate year at uni, so I was becoming very niche in my skill set, and I kind of wanted to solidify the training that I'd had at university. So I made the decision to go back to Australia at the end of that year. Had a couple of months travel before I went back, and in that time I kind of made the decision to set up my own practice back in Mansfield. Actually,
what was the travel you did?
So I had my flight booked for October to go back, and that flight was booked at the start of the year. I had a couple of months left and a little bit of cash, but not a lot. So I started looking at the way I could maximise the money I had left, how I could travel the best part of Europe on a shoestring budget. And so I punched into Google at the time, long distance hiking, and the Camino de Santiago came up, and had a good look into it. And actually the starting point in France was, a couple of train rides from Monaco or Nice. And so I made the call to get my backpack and jump on a train and get my way to the middle of France and start the Camino. So that was a 6-week trip altogether, traveling across France and Spain, ending up in...
What was the because a lot of people do the Camino as a bit of a soul search, or sometimes it's a bit spiritual as well. It can be also a bit religious. The Camino de Santiago, anyone doesn't know, maybe you explain exactly what the trip is.
Yeah, it's a pilgrimage at the end of the day. It's a Catholic pilgrimage, and I didn't do it for that reason, but it was obviously a famous, probably the most famous hiking trail or pilgrimage in Europe. So that was probably the first thing that popped up on Google when I typed in long distance hike. So it was a pretty easy route to follow. There was markers along the way and lots of towns to stop in, and it was an easy trip. But and I hadn't intended it on being a soul searching trip. I was just kind of looking to see some more of Europe and not have to pay for public transport. So
we see quite a lot of the north of Spain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I did the first part hiking and camping, just kind of wild camping and cooking my own meals and that sort of thing. And at a point after about 3 weeks in and about 500 Ks, I'd injured my foot, so I sent all my camping gear home and bought a mountain bike from Decathlon and did the rest of the way across Spain on the mountain bike. So yeah, it was a good trip in the end. Yeah.
And then you decided to come back. You're like, okay, what did not anyone, but say your brother or the people you're working with in Monaco and even Cervelo themselves think about you stepping away from that opportunity and then going, I just want to go back? And you had an idea then, I want to go back to my hometown. I think that's right for me. I want to do pretty much what I guess a lot of people graduating from university do, set up their own practice and get going in a somewhat, inverted commas, a normal way.
Yeah, I think the guys that I was working with at the time knew that, the Monaco sort of lifestyle didn't really sit well with me, and I couldn't see myself settling down there for a long term anyway. So
what is the Monaco lifestyle if people don't know that?
It's a wealthy, exclusive place to live. Lifestyle of the rich and the famous, and when you're earning an average wage, it sort of limits your ability to do things and to fit into that sort of environment. So and that's not sort of who I am, and I like the outdoors and the kind of down to earth sort of lifestyle. So it was a great experience, a great place to travel, and there's some great people there, but not somewhere I saw myself living long term. So I made the decision to set up my practice in Mansfield, and it's probably a comfortable place to go, and I knew there was a really big gap in the market at that time. So it was going from zero to fully booked in a really short space of time, and it was a busy few years in practice, that's for sure.
You come back and you're like, okay, you found a spot, you started settling back down. Were there any moments there along that period then you're settling back into normal life? You're like, normal life, well, I guess compared to what you'd done the years before, when was the penny drop where you're like, you know what, this isn't what it's cracked up to be, or this is not for me? Because from what I understand, tell me a little bit about your practice and your practice life there.
Yeah, so I set up in November, and within about a month, I had a full list of patients. I had sort of 60 patients booked in the week before Christmas. And
Isn't that the dream though?
That's the dream for any osteo setting up a practice, yeah. They said it could be 12 months before you're running at a profit in your business, and after about 3 weeks I thought, I don't know what they're talking about here, this is ridiculous. So,
is that the Gerrans name, is it? The strong Gerrans of Mansfield?
Certainly.
Your old man's going around like, you better get in there, support my son.
Yeah, just doing the rounds in the local supermarket, going, get down there, mate. For sure, having that local connection made a big influence, and there was a lot of people that came in and like, I work with your mum, or I went to school with this person and that person, and knowing a lot of people and just being a local, for sure, that word of mouth is really powerful in a town like Mansfield. So yeah, that worked to my advantage.
Good and bad. As soon as you do something bad,
exactly. Then, yeah. It was. My intention was to really set up multiple practices in northeast Victoria, and the reality was it was so hard to get osteopaths to country Victoria to work, and I found myself limited at the end of the day in Mansfield. And I thought, well, after a couple of years, I thought, if I'm sort of stuck to this and really struggling to grow my business and to expand it, then do I want to do this for the rest of my life? So that's where I started to sort of, look elsewhere and look back to Europe and to go back to doing some travel again. So
how old were you then?
So I finished up in 2013, so I was 29. So I was quite young when I set up. I was probably 26 when I set up my practice, and 29 when I sold it and decided to up and travel again.
Is the practice still there now?
Yeah, it was taken over by another osteopath who was sort of making a tree change, and he took over my list of patients and carried on from there. So yeah, it is. Yeah.
So tell me then, you were like, okay, I just need to go and travel. You weren't just going, I need to get back to the cycling. That was actually the ticket. Or were you romanticising about that little bit of time you had? Or was it just like, I think Europe could be cool? How did all Europe come about again?
Actually, I hadn't considered working in Europe again. I'd booked a trip to go to Nepal. I spent my grand plan was to spend a bit of time in Nepal trekking and traveling around. I wanted to go to Europe to visit Simon, and he had a couple of young kids at the time. I wanted to see them and spend some time with them. Then my intention was to actually get a touring bike and travel through Eastern Europe for 6 months for the summer, and I'd planned to move my life to Canada, to be honest. So it was a really unique way I came back into it. I spent my time in Nepal and got to Monaco around June. It was obviously the build-up for the Tour de France that year, and while I was staying with Simon, he said, could you help me out with some treatments in the weeks leading up to the tour? And was
he happy with your treatments along the way? Like, were you not necessarily Simon per se, but working with these pro athletes, were you understanding then, actually, I am pretty good. Like, these guys are at the top level, they're getting a lot of treatment, because I guess people in a country town, not to be disrespectful, may not know any different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, you being overseas, these cyclists, and I know myself, you're getting a lot of treatment from a lot of different people. And if they're coming back to you and your brother's saying, hey, we need you involved, we understanding that, I might actually be okay at this.
Yeah, it's probably something I didn't appreciate at the time, because it's a family member that's asking you, and you just assume that, okay, you're his brother, he's going to want to see you for treatment. But, looking back, he's such a professional
Oh yeah, he wouldn't, no
athlete.
way.
If I wasn't, doing something effective in a treatment, then he would have easily just chopped me and found somebody else. So.
He would have just told you. He would have told
me straight up, yeah. But I
Which
think,
is good,
Yeah, it's exactly to have that honest feedback. But, I'd had that experience, from the uni days and massaging riders, and I was working with, some young guys coming up and some triathletes doing regular massage and treatments throughout uni. So I sort of had a lot of hands-on experience before, coming straight back into it in, 2013 at that point. So, I think, you have to be happy with what I'm doing to be able to say, do you want to help us out at the Tour de France? We're looking for an osteo to fill that void, and so that was my kind of foot in the door.
What year was this?
This is 2013.
Oh, so back with that's with Mitchelton. With Green Edge.
Green Edge. This was the second year with Green Edge. So so I was there in Monaco in June, and he said, look, the riders are really looking to have an osteo at the tour. Would you be able to volunteer? And I was effectively a backpacker at that point. I said, yeah, I can travel around France for a month, and it was pretty unique circumstances, because the hotels are obviously fully booked months in advance, and to add an extra staff member in at that point was quite complicated. So there were days where I would come in, do some treatments, maybe stay a night, and then they didn't have somewhere for me to stay for a couple of stages, so I'd get on a bus and meet them 3 or 4 days later and come back in, and I was this kind of gypsy osteopath coming in and out of their Green Edge's Tour de France. And
was it quite nice in a way? Because now you know how regimented the system is. You just got to pop in and out, and then just be like away from the race for a few days.
Yeah, it was really interesting at the time, and I'm still referred to by a couple of staff members as a gypsy. So,
Oh, that's cool. So then now you're like, okay, you're sort of back in the system, and once you finish that there, you still had some travel for the rest of the year, or you're like, I now actually think this could be good, or you got pushed back into it without really knowing?
Yeah, I was sort of thinking, okay, I've lost a bit of the summer, but I've still got time to do this bike trip and make my way to Eastern Europe. I sort of planned the route out, and I thought, I could probably get to a certain point before it gets too cold. And I finished the tour, and about a week later, I got a call from Neil Stevens, from Stevo, and he said, oh, mate, what are you doing in August and September? And I was thinking, oh, shit, okay.
Well done.
Well done. And I said, okay, yeah. He said, we'd love to have you back to the Vuelta, and, the guys are really happy and really good feedback from your work at the tour. So I said, yeah, okay, that'd be great. And I'm thinking, okay, backpack a little bit of cash now. And And I really enjoyed the team dynamic and the culture of the team. So I was pretty excited to come back and do the Vuelta, and so that was another 4 weeks. 4 weeks on the road and getting to know everybody, and obviously a different group of riders at that point as well. I finished the Vuelta, and I'm thinking, geez, I'm sort of running out of time to do this trip.
I was on that for Vuelta. I remember it now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway,
got to the end of the Vuelta, and Whitey asked me, "What are you doing for the Worlds?"
Hey, this is the dream. People listening to this just going, bullshit.
Yeah.
Like this is just, one after the other. Yeah.
Yeah, and so at this point I'm starting to think, I'm actually really enjoying this working environment, and when I left my practice, I was pretty done with osteo, to be honest. I'd sort of burnt myself out in private practice. This was a completely unique environment and somewhere I could see myself getting back into, and obviously having the background there, through my uni days and working with some of the smaller teams in Australia. So, and seeing really that this is quite a unique culture that the team had at the time. So by the time I finished the Worlds, I was really, I put my hand up for the next year to say, okay, I want to come back and be involved with this team next year. So,
did you have to push hard there, or was it already approached you? Did you just go, hey, is there a spot open?
There was certainly staff management talking about bringing me back on for 2014, but I did have to push for it. I did have to really put myself out there with Shane Bannon and to say what I could bring to the team, and also convince the kind of the head doctor at the time that I was going to be good for the job. I remember Matt Wilson talking to me at the Vuelta saying, would you, we'd love to have you on board next year. Would you move to Monaco and sort of work with the guys there? They had a lot of the higher profile riders and up and coming guys, based in Monaco. So my brother was there, Matt Goss, Bling was there, and I think Caleb was maybe starting the next year in 2014. So they were pretty keen to have some support there. And actually, I was straight up with them. I said, look, I'm not keen to be based in Monaco again, and I don't particularly want to be attached exclusively with my brother. And I made good friends with Dan Jones at the time and a lot of the riders that were based in Girona. So I said, look, I think if I'm going to settle myself in Europe, it'll be in Girona. So in the end, they were okay with that. And in probably by the end of that year, I had an offer for some part-time, some days, essentially contract work.
Because explain to everyone out there, it's not as simple as, oh, you're really good, let's just put you in the team. Because all the team rosters are chocked. And a lot of people want to get in the teams. And it's a bit different to being a rider, because your time runs out. You get older, you have a long career, it's 10, 15 years. Most guys have a career, 5 to 8 years, whatever it is. So it's a changeover with cyclists. When you become staff member, you don't really lose your form. You can, and you get ingrained in the system. So there's not a lot of positions changing over the years, is there? And it's a little bit like a culture. Once you get in, you're sort of in, you get your nails stuck in, and it's difficult to break in. So like I'm trying to say, wasn't as simple as going, hey, Whitey, you like me, just put me in the team. Yeah.
I mean, there was staff on the team at the time, and it's, as you said, it's very much a one in, one out sort of situation with staffing. So you really have to kind of find the right moment with either a new team that are looking for staff or a smaller team that's maybe growing and looking for additional staff.
So who got axed for you then?
Well, they were building the staff at the time, so they were a little bit understaffed in terms of the physio and osteo department.
Right.
And so it just worked out for me that in 2014 I was the extra member of the staff, and at the end of 2014 the full-time physio we had moved on, and I was offered a full-time spot from there. So
it is very much like that, and it can be really difficult then for a lot of guys to get in, because I think that's something people don't understand on the outside. It's not just like going for a new job, or maybe it is like that in normal work too, is that people really do hang around and get in, and they get really good culture. So you've got to wait for that opportunity. Let's just talk about a day-to-day, because, day-to-day in a practice is very different to day-to-day on the road. And that can be, what I mean by that, I want you to run us through a day-to-day, but also the staff. You're not just going to work at 9 a.m, dealing with, whoever you work with, not dealing with, but working with the staff member, and hey, see you mate, see you tomorrow, have a good night, have fun with the family. It's like, see you at dinner in half an hour, and I'll see you back in the room, because we're actually sharing a room for the next 3 weeks. So tell me what it's like, first of all, day to day, what your job is, and also that whole dynamic of working on a team environment.
Yeah, it's quite a unique environment in that you live with your teammates 24/7 for 4 weeks at a time if you're doing a grand tour. So it's really important that you fit into the dynamic of the team, and you're, you know, basically a good person to live with, because you know, if you've got any real strong personalities there, they get found out pretty quick, and it just doesn't work in the environment that we live in. You know, there's fatigue, there's stress, pretty intense environment at times, and you kind of need to have a bit of a cool head to be able to deal with a lot of the situations. So yeah, on a day-to-day basis, you know, you're getting up at, you know, for me, I would be getting up at 6:30 thereabouts. I might go for a run. That's your kind of half-hour window for time for yourself in that environment. So try and get up and do some exercise. You know, staff generally eat together in the morning, and then prepare for the day. And my role, the first thing during the day would be to check on the riders, particularly the guys that have had, you know, any soreness or injuries or crashes from the day before. Check on them before we leave the hotel. I'd often leave my table set up if I need to do a bit of work before we get on the bus. Once we get to the start of the race, I would typically, you know, spend some time on the bus, and if I need to do some taping or some strapping with the guys, be available for that. Then it's a bit of a mixed role. I might be going to a bottle point or a feed zone, maybe directly to the finish, but yeah, more often than not, I'm stuck on the side of a hill waiting for you guys to come past to give some bottles, and then footing it to the finish. So yeah, from there we obviously have the transfer to the hotel, and then it's hands-on for a couple of hours before dinner.
So long days, you know.
Long days, yeah. You know, you think, you know, very often I'm treating guys after dinner as well, and it might be kind of finishing dinner at, you know, 10 o'clock, or even going to dinner at 10 o'clock sometimes. And depending on the demand, you might just kind of have a quick feed and go back to your room to keep treating. So yeah, you might kind of clock off at 11 o'clock some nights.
And then do a little bit of paperwork in between to sort of keep up the notes of the riders or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. You're trying to fit that in during the day as well, if you're, you know, at a bottle point and you've got, you know, an hour or so before the race is coming along to kind of make the most of those opportunities. Yeah.
So actually, does the paper degree actually mean a whole lot at the end of the day? You know, you're trained as an osteo, but at the end of the day, what I hear here is you've got to be a bit of adaptable. You've got to be a sort of a jack of all trades as well. Your skill is definitely very important, but it's being able to adapt and being able to, you know, evolve with what is necessary on the job, but not forgetting what your actual skill is, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're employed because of the skill set you have, the qualification you have, but that's one very small part of the role. You know, you look at the time that you have to get riders on a treatment table, it's maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. You know, the other 19, 20 hours are going to be, you know, filled with other sort of mundane duties and the kind of, the day-to-day routine of being on a cycling team. So, you do need that skill set. They're not going to take somebody on board if they're not qualified, but it is a small part of the role.
Is it something you enjoy?
I do. I love it. Yeah. I mean, I've been involved with, you know, from 2013, living in Europe and living that lifestyle now for 9 or 10 years. So, yeah, I do love it, and looking forward to continuing in it.
Speaking of living in Europe and living in that Girona, as you call it, well, Girona, not as you call it, Girona, the cycling environment. What's it really like living in this sort of consumed cycling town? Because at the end of the day, I know this too, is we end up hanging out with the same sort of crew. You've been able to get yourself a bit more involved with the local sort of culture and, you know, community because of, you know, your kids are now going to the school there. And there's not that need to go out training every day with another rider or whatever. So you've been able to sort of immerse yourself a bit more than, say, I was. But how have you found that over there? Because it is, again, it's ever evolving. Like, I've left now. There's going to be more guys leaving in the next few years. There's going to be more new guys coming. How have you found that for lifestyle? You're married to it, you know, you've got a Dutch wife, you're living in Spain, you're Australian, and there's guys coming and going. It's quite a complex life. It's not as, maybe it's painted up as this beautiful picture from people over in Australia or wherever they are, thinking, oh, this lifestyle in Spain, but it's pretty complex, and it's like there's no family there as well. Paint the picture for everyone out there what that life is like. Yeah,
it can be hard at times. You're obviously, you know, my wife's family are in Holland. That's at least a couple of hour flight away, and my parents are 24 hours. That's been the hardest thing, to be away from family, particularly the last couple of years where nobody's been able to travel. But it's when I moved to Girona in 2014, I kind of made the commitment that, you know, if I was going to commit myself to the role and the job, I was going to really try and settle in. So I made the effort to learn Spanish at the time. We very quickly found, you know, a house that we wanted to live in. and get the veggie garden and just kind of try and create a bit of that Australian kind of environment in where we live. And we've got a really good group of friends over there, so we have that support. And for our kids now, they're the aunties and uncles around us, and really trying to create that that familiar environment that I grew up with, and to give that to our kids. But it's a difficult one because it's a real changing environment. You've got, as you said, people come into Girona for a couple of years and you make good friends, and then they move on, and then you make some new friends, and it's not like your typical kind of like where we grew up, where you've got your friends and you grow right through school with them, and it's a real dynamic environment.
And obviously there's something you're really enjoying at the moment. Tell me a little bit about dealing with us cyclists now, the prima donnas, the weird things we do. We're coming in, it's a bit of a pressure cooker situation, and you got to have a bit of a cool head, and you're one of the best guys that I know, very calm, cool and collected. I think that's sort of a trait you need for your type of job, especially on the grand tours. Talking about the tours now, is that you got to deal with us at the end of the stages, emotional guys. You got to put the old psychotherapist sort of hat on when you get on the massage table, and then separate that too when you see us back in town as well. Be mates with us as well. It's a really difficult dynamic working with these pro sportsmen, sort of almost 24 hours a day. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, there's times when in terms of screening riders at the end of a day, or just basically coming onto the bus, and a lot of the time I, don't know who won or lost the race, and getting a feel for the atmosphere on the bus can be a tricky one. So you get on the bus, and if everyone's up and about, you're like, all right, did we get a result? What's going on here? If everyone's sort of moping around, or so you sort of have to scope that out and be a little bit sensitive to it. And I've kind of taken the tact of win, lose or draw, just keep quite neutral in it all. And, some days you might get a good result, but, there can still be shit going on in the bus. Yeah. Somebody's had a shocking day, and you can't be all up and about if somebody's had, been out the arse all day and just struggling to make time cut, because it hasn't been a great day for them. Yeah. So take each guy as an individual and not just assume that because if, you've had a good day, or one guy's had a good day, that it's been that way across the board. So, but it's interesting because it's a real mix between my personal life and my professional life. You're right. And I need to kind of find that switch when I'm in the working environment. You're not my mate, you're my teammate. You're not having preferences of, okay, Mitch is my mate, so I'm going to get him on the table first. You really have to prioritize the team in that environment, and know when to switch on and switch off from a work point of view, for sure. What
about back on the massage table? I can speak personally about this. It is a nice moment, and I've heard about this between the mechanics and not necessarily between the mechanics and the soigneurs, but definitely between the soigneurs, the guys who get to go to the hotels, and the other, because how it works is, from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, it's split between the staff members that go on the bus, go to the finish, the feed zones, and go to the hotel. You go to the hotel, you don't see any riders, and you sort of doing that work, and the mechanics don't really get much interaction with the riders at all either. So it is a sought out thing, weirdly. As a rider, you sort of think, what do you want to talk to me for? But it's nice to hear us debriefing about the day, or talking stuff, or just getting in on the know about the race, or you hear it firsthand from the riders. Is that something you like, being on the table, hearing all that, I would say, not gossip, but sort of race gossip, and what's going on, and the nitty gritty, and this guy chopped me up, and I hate that guy, and all this sort of stuff? Is that a nice part of the day, or I don't know, is that not stuff for you?
It's certainly an exclusive access to get the inside, scoop on what's happened during the day. But I try and leave it up to the rider. If they want to talk about the day and debrief it and kind of offload all the sort of shit that's going on, then that's up to them, and I'll engage in that conversation. But if they're too tired to talk, I'm happy to let them kind of chill out on the table and just get a treatment and talk about something other than cycling. And very often that's the case. We kind of put the cycling aside for a little while and talk about some normal things. But it just depends on the rider as well. Some guys like to really offload, and that's part of the treatment, actually talking about all the stuff that went on for the day, and a good way to kind of unwind and really kind of finish the day, if you like, before they can move on to the next one.
Do you ever see yourself as a bit of a person who can give them that helpful advice? They feel like do you feel like they're leaning towards you, looking for that answer or looking for that sort of advice, or, do you feel that sort of need to, or you just let it just wash over you and like, yeah, mate, good on you, you be right?
I think that's part of the role as a therapist, as an osteopath. At the end of the day, there's the kind of the psychological component to a therapy, and you're not a qualified psychologist, obviously, but you're trained to listen to people and to know, when to give some advice and when to just, ask them for what they would do in that situation, and let them kind of talk out their own issues. But certainly in the stressful environment, in a racing environment, there's a lot of mental challenges along the way, and as you would know, particularly a Grand Tour, over 4 weeks, when the fatigue starts to set in, the immune system starting to get run down, and you're just trying to get through day to day. So that's certainly a big part of the role, I would say, when you're treating somebody.
Tell me a little bit about the difference between treating a sort of a local person, an everyday cyclist, or just an everyday person living their life, doing a 9-to-5 job, opposed to treating on the road professional cyclists, professional sportsmen, really. What I've sort of gathered, either talking to you or just other sort of physio or osteos, is that there's more of a need for a professional, this might sound very obvious, and more of a need for a professional athlete to get better. What do I need to do, Andy? What's wrong? My legs seem, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it tomorrow. Whereas I get the feeling from Joe Blow is like, I'll see you next week, mate. I'll see you at 9 next week. I can't be bothered. I'd rather you just treat me. Is that a generalisation?
Yeah, generally speaking, I'd say that's the case. When you've got a professional athlete on the table, they're really involved in the process of what they need to do. What's the quickest way they can recover, and they can be quite demanding in a way. Like, okay, we're doing that treatment. Will I be okay now? Or if I do this stretch, twice as many times as you told me, will I get better twice as fast? This sort of thing. So you have to kind of gauge the individual and work out, if somebody's going to do a stretch twice as many times as what you're going to tell them to, then you tell them half as many and find that balance. But your kind of general patient in a private practice can be like that, or they can be completely, passive in the treatment and just expect you to kind of fix them and not be engaged in doing anything outside of the treatment environment. But in most cases, an athlete will be really involved in that process and wanting to know everything they can do to kind of get better quicker. So that's one of the reasons I enjoy working with athletes so much, because they're so committed to their recovery and sort of taking some ownership in the injury as well, which I think is really important.
I guess that demanding side of it, yes, I can see the annoying side of it, but it also makes you lift as well. Like, oh God, this guy's on me. Okay, mate. Okay, let's do it. They're really demanding from you. When someone doesn't demand that from you, like, yeah, right, see you next week, mate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Makes you want to be better too.
100%. Yeah.
Annoys the hell out of you, but yeah.
You're like, oh Christ, okay, let's talk about nutrition. Let's talk about this and sleep and resting when you need to, and that's a big part of it as well. Just sometimes it's a matter of just switching off and letting the body recover, and something that a lot of athletes struggle to do, because they think as soon as they're resting, they're losing fitness, and that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge in terms of finding that balance between recovery and kind of training side of things.
Oh, I've got a couple of questions left. One thing I want to know is there someone out there listening, if they haven't picked it up already from all this sort of stuff about your story, is there a typical sort of job line? If you're sitting here now, about to go to uni, I want to be in the World Tour as a trained medical staff. Let's just put that umbrella out there, whether that be whatever it is, physio, osteo, chiro. What would your advice be now for yourself going back? And I know you didn't want to go there in the beginning, but someone listening going, you know what? I really want to be there. How do you do it?
Yeah. I'd say you need to put yourself out there at a local level initially. Get involved with a local cycling club. It's almost a prerequisite that you do cycle yourself. You have an understanding of the sport and the challenges involved in cycling. Put your hands up to volunteer to help out if you've got a local athlete that's going to a state championships or a local race or an NRS race. See if you can volunteer and help them out. And that might be just, like I said, doing some massage or making the bottles and doing the extra kind of work, and try to make some connections from there. There's always going to be somebody involved in one of those races that has a contact further up and further along, they've got some connections, and then you've got to make the most of that and kind of put yourself out there each time and try and progress a little bit further in where you want to go. It might go from an NRS race to something a bit bigger, and maybe making a connection with an athlete that's going in the right direction. And if you're good at what you do, they'll want to take you with them. So I'd say probably start from there, and you can't just put a CV in and try and get a job at World Tour, because without a recommendation or a connection with somebody at that level, just because of the environment that you're in, they're not going to take somebody on board that they don't know. It's, as we said, you're living out of each other's pockets for 3 or 4 weeks, and they're not going to bring a stranger into that environment without the kind of recommendation from somebody on the inside.
So now, what does the future look like for you, in the coming years? Is this a job, that you see for 5, 10, like I said, you can actually get in the system and you can stay in there if you're still loving it and you're working well, and it's a great job, great bunch of people. What does it look like for you now? Where are you at? Where do you see? What's your future look like, Andy?
So I've just changed this year in 2022 with Israel Startup Nation from Green Edge previously. It's been a change for me and a new challenge and taking me out of my comfort zone after all that time with one team. So I think the important thing for me in not just this position but in my career is that as long as I'm growing and as long as it remains to be exciting and challenging, then I'd like to stay. And I think if I'm with a team that is progressing and helping me kind of progress on my path, then it's somewhere I'd like to stay. So as long as that's the case in 5 years or 10 years, I'll hopefully still be involved with the sport.
Because it is an ever-involving job, and I'll ask you another question now, sorry, but it's an ever-involving job that's something you've always evolved with. Like you said, you got some nutrition, you got some study in nutrition, you're also studying other things apart from your own specialty skill. Can you see it sort of evolving that way for the future? And is it building up skill sets for outside of it, or just to make yourself more interested in the job?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be versatile in your role. And over the years, I've seen not necessarily gaps, but areas where I could see there's potential to help riders improve their performance, improve in how I treat and the advice I give to riders. So the kind of extra training and study, professional development I've done over the last 10 years has really all lent towards an athlete focus and trying to build my career to stay in the sport. And if you create a skill set where you are really versatile, then they can use you for multiple things. And I've started heading down the strength and conditioning line a lot more recently, and I've got much more of a role in that now with Israel, with the setup in Girona and the riders that are based there. So helping them through the pre-season, and also trying to maintain some of that strength work through the year as well. So it's also an interest area for me, and an area that I like to keep learning and progressing. And I think that's really important in any industry, really.
Cool. So, is it actually what it's all cracked up to be? Because there's guys sitting wherever they are listening to this and go, hang on, I'm a bloody good physio. That sounds pretty good. Is it actually what it's cracked up to be? I know, yes, in a whole general schemes, you're going to probably say yes because you're working in it. But...
Or I could say no, just to put people off. Look, it certainly has its moments. You have your kind of wow moments at times through the year, and whether that's just being involved in something really unique and special in the team, or it can be a location too. You can be kind of parked up on the side of the road, waiting to get bottles, and you just look around and go, this is amazing, and this is really special that I'm being paid to be here. But there's a lot of times when you're kind of spending hours on end, and you're driving. Yeah, I would spend half my time on the team driving a car, whether it be to a race or through the day. You might spend 6 hours a day in the car, and I'd had a 15-hour road trip to get to the start of the Tour de France last year. So it's sort of
like, Andy, what time for massage, mate?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you've gotten in the car at 5:30 and you arrive to the hotel at 8:30 at night, with about half an hour of stops. And all right, you got your table set up, mate?
Be up in 2 minutes, mate.
Yeah. So there's what people see from the outside is probably the highlights, but there's a lot of moments where you go, all right, this is why I'm getting paid to do the job, not because of all the fun stuff.
Well, there we have it. Andy Gerrans, what did you think of that? Did it give you a bit more of an insight into that pathway across as a staff member, as an osteopath? Andy has a talent too. He's an awesome guy to work with, like his brother. With his hands, he's an amazing osteopath, plus just a great person to have on your team. He can just take on any task at hand. I love talking to him. I love hanging out with him. He's a good friend and also been a great guy to have on my side when I've been on those tours as well. Guys, like I said before, exciting news coming. The Life in the Peloton cap is about to be released. The Talking Luft edition. Next week, I have got Talking Luft with Simon Gerrans, Andy's brother. Simon has been on the podcast way back in 2017. Simon was one of the first guests that I had on there. So if you haven't heard that episode, go back and have a listen to that one as well. Next week, he'll be our Talking Luft guest. Of course, I've got to say thanks to Lara behind the scenes who is making this stuff happen. Will Jones who put this episode together. But of course, Rapha. These guys are making these podcasts come to life this year, so a massive thanks goes out to them. And of course, you guys for listening. So guys, until next week, hang in there, send in your feedback, and cheers, guys. The music in this episode was composed by Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.